Title: Airplane door opens mid-flight. How is this possible? The hum of the airplane engines was a constant, a deep, rhythmic lull that made most of the 220 passengers aboard Flight 317 drift into uneasy slumber. Cruising at 36,000 feet, the Boeing 777 was halfway between New York and London when the first sign of trouble emerged, silent and unnoticed. Ella Thompson sat in seat 14A, her fingers drumming against the tray table. A 32-year-old investigative journalist, she was known for uncovering hidden truths. But tonight, her mind wasn't on her latest article. It was on her brother, Michael. It had been 6 years since she'd spoken to him, and now she was flying to London for his wedding. Across the aisle, an older man named Victor Reynolds sat with a tightly clutched briefcase. His suit was immaculate, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the plane's cool air. Occasionally, he glanced at the emergency exit across from him, his face pale under the cabin lights. 2 rows back, Jason Park, a nervous 23-year-old engineering student, repeatedly checked the safety manual. He had a fear of flying, and despite his logical mind telling him the plane was safe, his heart raced with every minor turbulence. The flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, offering drinks and soft smiles. Among them was Leah Morales, who had been with the airline for nearly a decade. She prided herself on staying calm under pressure, but tonight felt off. It was 2:14 a.m. when the lights flickered, just for a second. Ella barely noticed, but Jason's eyes snapped wide open. He clutched his armrest tighter. Then there was a low, vibrating hum, deeper than the engine's usual purr. Leah noticed it too. She glanced toward the rear of the plane, where Victor sat staring at the emergency door. She walked over. "Sir, is everything all right?" Victor jumped slightly.
"Fine.
"Just don't like flying." But Leah's eyes dropped to the handle of the emergency door. There was a faint scratch near the latch. She frowned. "This door is triple-locked mid-flight. Nothing to worry about." Victor nodded, but didn't relax. Minutes later, the turbulence hit, violent and sudden. Oxygen masks rattled from the overhead compartments. Screams echoed as the plane jolted downward before the pilot steadied it. But then came the sound no one expected: metal groaning. Leah's heart dropped as she turned toward the mid-cabin emergency exit. The seal around the door trembled, air hissing through invisible cracks. "Impossible," she whispered. Jason noticed it first. The handle of the emergency door was vibrating, ever so slightly, despite the cabin pressure. Is that supposed to happen?" he shouted, his voice breaking. Passengers turned, gasps spreading like wildfire. Ella instinctively grabbed her phone, filming as panic erupted. Victor clutched his briefcase tighter, his knuckles white. Leah grabbed the intercom. "Everyone stay seated. Fasten your seatbelts. We are handling the situation." But it was too late. The door lurched, not fully open, but enough for a deafening roar of wind to blast through. Papers, cups, and a laptop shot through the gap. Jason gripped his seat for dear life as passengers screamed, their voices drowned by the chaos. Ella's camera was nearly ripped from her hand as she braced herself. Through squinting eyes, she saw Victor stand, while everyone else cowered. He was moving toward the door. "Sit down," Leah screamed, but Victor ignored her. Ella, her journalist instincts flaring, unbuckled her belt. Crazy, she knew, but something was wrong. She scrambled toward Victor, grabbing his arm. "What the hell are you doing?" Victor's face was pale, but determined. "You don't understand. Someone tampered with the door. This isn't natural." Ella's mind raced. "How do you know that?" He hesitated. "Because I designed the security protocols for this aircraft." Before she could process that, another violent jolt sent them both crashing into the seats. Jason, despite his fear, stood to help pull Ella up. "What does he mean, tampered?" Jason shouted. Victor's jaw clenched. "There's a device inside the door. Someone planted it to override the lock. Leah's voice crackled over the intercom. Cabin depressurization imminent. Brace positions, everyone. But Ella's mind was spinning. Who would do this? Why? Victor looked at his briefcase. Because of what I'm carrying. Victor finally opened his briefcase, revealing not money or secrets, but technical blueprints. This is a prototype for a new security system, he explained. It's worth billions. Someone didn't want it to make it to London. Ella pieced it together. They rigged the plane, knowing you'd be on it. He nodded grimly. Suddenly, Jason's eyes widened. If they tampered with the door, maybe they sabotaged more. Ella barely hesitated. Cockpit. We need to warn the pilots. But before they could move, the door lurched again, the gap widening. A woman screamed as her handbag was sucked into the void. We don't have time, Leah yelled. Victor's eyes darted to the control panel near the door. We can override it if we cut the circuit. Jason hesitated. I know how. I studied aircraft mechanics. Victor handed him a small tool from his briefcase. You've got one chance. As Jason crawled toward the exposed wiring near the emergency door, the wind howled louder. His hands trembled, the thin metal vibrating under his fingers. Jason, focus, Ella shouted. Sweat dripped down his temple as he worked. One wrong move, and the door would rip wide open. Passengers were crying, bracing, some praying. Ella knelt beside Victor. Who did this? Victor's eyes were cold. Someone on this flight. But before she could respond, a shadow lunged from the crowd. Leah. She wasn't who she claimed to be. Her hand gripped a small, black device. You should have stayed in your seat, she hissed. Victor tried to shield Ella, but Leah shoved him aside, aiming the device at the exposed wires. But Jason, in a burst of courage, pulled the final circuit free just as Leah pressed the button. The door slammed shut with a bone-jarring clang. The cabin fell silent. Leah tried to run, but Victor tackled her to the ground. Passengers cheered as flight attendants restrained her. The plane landed hours later under emergency protocols. Leah was taken away in handcuffs, an undercover agent for a rival tech company determined to destroy Victor's prototype. As passengers disembarked, Jason was hailed as a hero. Ella, ever the journalist, had caught it all on film. Victor, looking at Ella, said softly, Ever thought about writing fiction? You'd be great at thrillers. Ella laughed, her heart still racing. After this? Maybe I'll stick to real life, though I doubt anything could top this. The news spread worldwide. Airplanes sabotaged mid-flight. Heroic passengers saved 220 lives. But somewhere in the shadows, someone else read the headline and smiled. The game wasn't over. The end.